Good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's Tuesday, May 14th, 6:30 p.m. I'm going to call our Committee of the Whole meeting to order. We're going to start with a moment of silent reflection. Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. Moving on to our land acknowledgement. The municipality of Port Hope exists on the lands of the Mississauga Anishinaabeg traditional territory covered by the Williams Treaties. We honor and recognize First Peoples as rights holders and stewards of the lands and waters on which we have the privilege to live, work, and play, including the Ganaraska Forest and River. We pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging. We commit to actions towards truth and reconciliation by recognizing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, strengthening ties with First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples, especially those who make their home in Port Hope, and learning from Indigenous ways of knowing and being. We do so by recognizing the past and working towards a shared future. Moving on to item number 2, pecuniary interest. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? I note that none were received in advance of today's meeting. Moving on to item number 3, correspondence. We have none, and I just want to note that Councillor Attridge is joining us at the table at 6:32 p.m. Moving on to item number 4, items for consideration. 4.1, staff presentation by David Baxter, Director, Finance, regarding our budget kickoff. Can I please get the Director to introduce his presentation?
Good evening, and thank you, Madam Mayor. So excited to be standing in front of you now in May, talking about the upcoming budget. We just passed our final tax levy bylaw at the last meeting, and are switching gears with a view to 2025, so that we can plan in advance. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit briefly about the budget process, but mainly about improvements that we are planning on making for this year. Provide some budget considerations for your awareness, as well as some of the parts of our budget preparation, and then provide an update on our community engagement. So with that, you will note this year, for the past 2 years, we've provided more of a budget orientation, much less orientation, as this is now your third budget, much more, and some of which is just reminder information from last November when we were going through the budget. Okay. One of the things is, as we've discussed, is our plan when we come back to you in November is to shorten up the length of time in our meetings, and more so build that knowledge over the course of the year. Is what we've called our budget roadmap, which I spoke a few months and kicked that off. If you think back to when MPAC came and spoke to us, that was one of the first items on that roadmap. So we are going to have a little bit more information on some of the financial, some of the budget considerations tonight, building that knowledge right along our journey to getting to November, so that we're not going through as much in November, and you have more opportunity to think and process that picture, and have less of it be delivered in such a concentrated way. Okay. So first, though, back to the basic budget process. This is a very general one, just from municipal finance training. So in the spring, we start doing preliminary estimates. Come the summer, when you start doing the detailed budget preparation, we start doing some decision making, with some involvement with from the public. Then come November, December, looking to bring forward to committee, and then by December to council. make our decisions in terms of the budget, and then be in a position come January 1st that we have a plan to start the year, and we're able to, utilize, put out some of our tenders and things before our suppliers have already got a full, workload and are happy to do our work at a premium, so to speak. And we've definitely seen that when we made the shift to in the savings of us actually having a budget approved before the year begins. And more specifically, as we go through, if you think about it right now, and for 2023, we're in the final evaluation and audit steps, right, from that budget. We are for 2024, we're full implementation mode. And now we are in the pre-planning process for 2025. And I'm not going to talk about the other steps because we just went through those, but it is certainly a cycle. And at times right now we're in this cycle on 3 different budgets. Moving our focus on to 2025. So we're looking to make some improvements. Last year I had a different set of improvements in front of you. So trying to keep learning and evolving every year. And sometimes what worked well 2 years ago, things have changed, right? So we are now, as I mentioned, we actually started, so we're here in mid-May talking with you as committee. We actually kicked off internally with our management team our budget in April, right? So I'll talk about that a little bit more, but starting sooner this year, looking more towards asset management to drive our capital budget. This is a journey, right? We've got a long part of the journey to go. Creating the budget roadmaps, which I've spoken to and we'll come to in a few minutes. Looking to have the police and library boards present their budgets in advance of the municipal budget. So we'll have a committee night where they come and they present their budgets. Trying to then not have everything be all at once, trying to give you the opportunity to be able to take some time, really look at those, quite material, contributions to the overall budget, just to kind of space that out a little bit in a bit more of our phased approach, which will enable us to get to a one-day, finance committee meeting, right? Where we will present the budget in the morning, which will have already been posted in advance for your review, and then provide the afternoon for, deliberations. And certainly as part of that presentation, we're going to be looking at grouping, some of the different aspects, of the presentation as we talked about last November. So, we look forward to that. We're also going to be expressing levy changes as a weighted average dollar impact, as we discussed, and we provided us direction last November, as well as not focusing less on the percentage, which can be misleading and easily, construed in different ways. Really focusing on that dollar impact of the taxpayer, which is relatable and is a more consistent part. And when we do, as you just saw in the report when I was talking at your last committee meeting, it will be at the final budget stage, right? So at that point, we then know what's coming in from the county. We know what's coming in for the education boards. We know how much LRW money we're using. We know the different county tax policy part. And then we can say, this is what the tax levy percentage changes on the total bill, right? As opposed to kind of having one thing in November, and then as the other information comes in, that percentage keeps changing, and that becomes confusing. So obviously some objectives behind this is making connections between the annual reports and their impact on the budget come November, December. Addressing some key discussion points from our 2024 budget deliberations, right? Many of which came from your table. Provide considerations and decision-making opportunities in advance of the final 2025 budget decision. So we're going to talk about tax allocation, right? Before we talk about before we're looking to finalize the budget. We're going to provide professional development opportunities to expand knowledge on budget-related topics. We've already had a few of them, as I mentioned. One of the first being on MPAC coming in and talking about, right? We've talked about some different tax policy aspects as well. Establish a holistic understanding of the interconnected considerations contributing to the overall municipal budget, in simple terms, right, we have development charges, and that requires the growth for that money to come in. But if we then have growth projects and we don't need to use as much levy money from existing taxpayers for growth projects, because we can apply some development charge funding to that, right? So that's, just an example of how the growth ties into one of our fees that we're just going over last week, and then how that can help actually offset some costs that would otherwise go to the levy, right? So there's lots of parts. That's, there's debt, there's some reserves, there's lots of different parts, and so we're going to cover those and understand a little bit better how they all are interconnected. And simplify the levy change information to enhance public understanding. So we're going to talk about the roadmap. It's kind of a collection of 3 different things, right? Our recurring annual reports and updates, which we're going to, connect to the budget, special topic reports and presentations, and then some professional development. And we have a timeline. It's going to be subject to change. It's going to be fluid with, as we get the information prepared and the needs and availability of that information. So for some examples, recurring annual reports, we've already talked about the annual grants from last year, right? Which ones of those are recurring and what we, are anticipating. We're going to be talking about property tax receivables. We're soon internally going to be starting our user fees and charges process. We're going to talk about reserves, long-term debt, tax allocation. These are all pretty much all annual discussions. And then we have some special topics like the development charges study that we're currently underway on. We kicked off last week. Planning and development projections, asset management levels of service, and then some professional development like the MPAC, tax policy, development charges, and asset management. We've covered all 3 of those thus far this year. In the budget roadmap, this is just to give you an idea. I recognize you can't read every item, and that is totally fine. We're following and going through a process. But just so that you can kind of look and see that we've kind of looked at every meeting and are trying to, what information are we going to cover? What are we going to share with you, educate you on? What questions are we going to bring to you to be able to achieve all of this? Because we're essentially doing even more than we did last year, right? And we're doing it over in a phased approach. I spoke before about, management team. We kicked off in April. Right? This really is to provide some more time for us internally and to alleviate some of the end of the year. We always have, we have performance reviews, we have year end, people are taking vacation. So just to get people's mindsets started sooner in terms of the budget. And the other part is around having our capital budget be more led by our asset management team, right? As we move on our journey towards asset management planning. So some budget considerations now. I'm not going to read through our mission and vision, but it's really important that we, go through the budget process and at the onset, consider what our mission is, right? Consider what our vision is. The other part I've included, and this is more of an internal item that's established, but some of our core value statements. And I included it here because this is this is from the perspective that we're encouraging our management team to do everything they do, but one of those things certainly is in terms of our budget. But I feel like a lot of it does apply to the entire budget process, whoever's involved, right? So integrity is doing the right thing. Teamwork, right? Sharing the path to collective success. We all have different roles in that process. Trust is empowering staff to get the job done. Part of it, I spoke about roles. So one part of that is about respecting, right? As I said, we each have different roles, in that process. And certainly forward thinking, right? To support the future of our community. And some of those lead into, the strategic plan, and we have certain categories in terms of housing, economic growth, a welcoming, livable community, climate resiliency, sustainable infrastructure, and good governance. So that, those are the foundations from which we, should be and are looking to build our budget. as you've heard, obviously a significant corporate priority, both because it's the right thing to do, but also because the timelines, are being legislated to us, is around asset management plan, right? And having, a year from now, we need to not just have an updated plan, but also to have a long-term financial strategy and have identified what those levels of service are, right? Which may be increases, maybe reductions, but we have to balance that, right, against the affordability factor, which really, is a longer-term view on the capital side, but is also in a small way what we have to do every year, right? On a smaller version, what we have to do every year when we do the budget. Economically, you've seen this before, so I'm just going to touch on it, briefly. We've got the consumer price index identified on here in gray. We put it on there because we often hear about the consumer price index, and I know in November and December, we passed the budget and it's like, well, I think this is higher than the consumer price index. And I find, two things. One, many people still think the CPI is at like 2%, right? And it's not. And two, it's often used as a comparator when really there's not a whole lot that we're purchasing, right, that would be in the basket of the consumer price index. So it's relevant. We put it up here for comparison. But I just want to be clear, I'm not putting it up here because I think this is a good comparator for municipal expenses. A better comparator is in orange, which is the non-residential building consumer price index. And especially when we think about our capital budget, which is, is a significant part of our budget, right? Better reflecting the cost of concrete and lumber, and whether it's on the capital side, building or doing rural road resurfacing. And as you can see, right, we had many years where we weren't, keeping up, and certainly in 2021 and 2022. And so we're in catch up, we're in catch up mode. Now, this graph you've certainly seen before. I find this graph to be very, very impactful. As we understand where we were in 2016 when our last formal asset management plan was done, right? The gray representing our annual, right? Our annual average funding required to sustain our infrastructure, our current infrastructure, I should say, and only the levy-funded infrastructure. So that gray doesn't include the water, it doesn't include wastewater and some of those other aspects. This is only levy-funded. And when we look back at 2017, we had about $1.6 million, right, of the about $9 million covered. But what has happened over time, while the blue has increased as we've increased our annual levy funding towards capital, the orange is the inflation. And the inflation, especially come 2022 and onward, inflation has been much higher, which has pushed our annual requirement up over $14 million. So while we've now grown to having funding, an annual funding for from levy towards capital of about $4 million, right? Our requirement is now 14, leaving us a $10 million gap. So currently, just to run through some numbers, it's kind of too early in this year to look at what our non-residential, like what we're expecting our capital inflation to be for this year. But if we look at our remaining inflationary gap, because certainly one of the questions last year, and the year before was how long before we actually start making improvement and not just playing catch up. Well, there's a few steps, a few different milestones I see at this. The first is just the current remaining inflation gap. That's $1.1 million and works out to the typical residential homeowner of about $141. In context, last year's increase was $900,000, right? So it would require a larger capital investment than what we did last year, right? To get caught up from the inflation that's occurred since 2017. And that's without considering inflation being added in this year. And then we also have to think about the fact, though, that back in 2017, we were covering 1.6 million. So really, in order for us to get in the same spot as we were in 2017, right, it's really $2.7 million, right, to get there before we consider inflation for this year. And ultimately, to get to fully funding, funded is just under $10 million, right? So this is the challenge that we have and the challenge we're working through. And obviously the answer isn't to come in and make this change in 1 year, but that's why it's so important that we, maintain a phased approach and try and keep up with inflation as it's occurring in these high inflationary years, and then maintain that level of investment, right, as inflation comes down, so that we do start making, some progress, because it's about trying to find that balance, right? We want taxes to be affordable, but we also, want and need to be able to maintain our infrastructure. Moving on to our current debt situation, you'll see in 2024, we're actually at our lowest debt point within our either our current actuals or our future repayments, right? And so while we are below our self-imposed 10% of our own source funding for going towards debenture payments, we have projections for our future projects that are going to get us up to that 10%. And it is also a challenging time with higher interest rates for us to take on debt. So I again encourage, committee, that debt is not our answer to be able to do more, right now. It's an option, but it's not a good option. So some economic considerations, I'm going to touch base on this very quickly. But if you recall, when MPAC did their presentation, and I pointed this out following it, in 2023, their estimates for our growth and new assessment was $37.5 million. In 2024, right, it is a notably lower $28.4 million. So one of the things we need to think about in terms of growth, in terms of how many new taxpayers are going to come in and help in the share of the cost of running our community, right? Fewer taxpayers joining this year for that. On the bright side, planning approvals, we do have a number of things that are positive in the pipeline. When we look more closely at building permits from 2022 to 2024, 2024 year to date, is pretty in line with 2022 and 2023. Legislatively, several challenges in terms of our development charges. We just talked about this at length. There is some good news on the horizon with the provincial government looking to make some changes to put back in place things that used to be here before, to reduce some of the burden on municipalities. So we look forward to that. On the financial side, when we look at funding, so just a reminder, and this one seems very basic, but it when we ultimately come to our day in November and we're talking about not wanting the levy to be higher, but still wanting to do things, there are other revenue and funding sources, right? And it's important because this is where we look at each one individually and say, well, you know what, we want to keep our user fees down, or we want to keep our utility fees down, or we want to keep our development charges down, right? They all, not all, but most of them do impact each other, right? So from a user fee standpoint, rarely are we doing full cost recovery, right? Unless it's an area like building, in which case it's legislated. But those, that's why, we are going to be reviewing and be looking to have increases in our user fees, because whether it's getting on the bus, whether it's getting in the pool, right? Whether it's signing up for something and having an administrative fee to help, cover that, those are all revenues that help cover existing costs, that help keep down, that they offset the levy. We have our utility charges, and just a reminder on this one that it is a fully cost recovery system, water and wastewater. So the utilities are part of our budget. However, they are separate and there is no levy impact, okay? Certainly we have grants, right? You recall some of these are recurring, which helps us plan. Some of them are one-time, which makes planning a little bit more difficult. They come up in the middle of the year. And some of them are formula-based, again, helpful for planning, and others are application-based. And we look to the province, we look for federal, we look for any other municipal opportunities, and also in the private and foundational funding areas, for grants that just help bring an additional revenue source. We have development charges, again, growth-related projects. We just spent quite a bit of time on that. I will point out that for development charges, our initial findings were posted on Friday. That's the beginning of our 60-day, period before we come forward towards making a decision. And in the interim, we'll have our statutory public meeting, so we'll actually be walking through that with each of you. Okay. And then other ones, we have shared capital costs with some other entities. We have some donations, and then of course we have the levy. And the levy, it always takes the focal, part, because it's the one area where we put all the rest of the costs and send that in a bill once a year or twice a year for some, and actually give to our taxpayers, which is unlike most of any of the other taxes that they pay, right? We're giving it to them all at once. So it does take on a certain amount of focus, obviously, but we need to remember that the net budget is after all of the other revenue sources, right? We know that an increase in the property tax, right? It's a $44 impact to the average resident. It generates $345,000 for the municipality. And there is a relationship with the additional growth that we bring on that has a reduction in whatever the tax increase is, or the share that our existing residents pay. I've already talked about the impact. So, here's the mitigation mechanisms, right? It's those other revenue sources. And some important context when we look. So our capital funding from levy is about $4 million. We already have 4 projects, right? 3 vehicles that have over a year lead time. So we approved the purchase order for those as part of the 2024 budget, but we know we won't be paying for them until 2025. So they were pre-approved. We'll raise the money from the 2025 budget. And then a portion of the fire station, those 4 capital pre-budget approvals already use up $2.4 million, leaving us with just under $1.5 million coming from levy. And when we think about the annual rural roads resurfacing program at $700,000, right? And this doesn't include, we're going to have a half-ton pickup truck, and a few other things, obviously, some playground equipment, all the usual things as part of our asset management process. It doesn't include those things. And if we turn around and look at, another phase of the final phase of Walton, and I know we're not, next year we're looking at fire station, but these are the things that are on the horizon. You can start to see, it's not just, me standing up here and pointing at a graph and saying we have an infrastructure funding gap, right? This is just a few tangible examples of what that actually looks like in a year. Okay. So you think, well, what about the other pots of money that we have? Well, here's and these are proposed. These aren't final numbers from 2023, but on the next few graphs, the bold line is the cumulative line, and you can see that we don't have money coming in from growth, development charges that's sitting there waiting to be spent. In most cases, we've built the infrastructure, some of which was to benefit growth. So some of the funding came from development charges, but all of that growth hasn't actually occurred yet, right? So we actually have, on a cash flow basis, we have a funding shortfall. We have our grant reserve funds, and this is primarily the larger ones like the federal gas and the things that are recurring that we can use towards our roads and other infrastructure. And we were saving some of those up. You can see that, right? Knowing that we had large project like Walton coming along, and that's what's helped us kind of smooth out the cost of Walton. But in doing so, right, those cupboards are relatively bare now. And then when we look at reserves the types of reserves we typically go to use for capital, a very similar situation, right? and that they are further negative really on the water and the wastewater side, as those are self-funded systems. And so that will be caught up over time through utility rates. So I've already mentioned 4 of the pre-budget approvals, just to put those back in your mind. This is the starting spot from which we are building our 2025 budget. So we have the fire tanker, we have 2 snow plows, part of the design for Fire Station 2, and then also the sub-watershed study was phased over 2 years. So this is the other funding for that. So $2.5 million pre-committed. And then finally, just to touch base on community engagement. So we're looking to have some earlier opportunities to align with the rest of the timeline we're working with. The My Port Hope page will continue to be a good opportunity to be able to post those materials, to be able to have the public be able to make comments, utilize a survey like we did last year, and we're developing those engagement plans. We've received some feedback like the rest of our budget for last year. We are about to be printing the inserts that are going to go into the tax bills, which do include information and highlights about the 2024 budget, encouraging involvement for 2025, and going through and continuing the good work that our communications team does. So that is the initial information, just to get you primed, get you start thinking about the 2025 budget. I know it's a lot. It's a lot of information. Remember, though, that's why we're doing this in May, right? That's why we're doing this in May, and it's important to have this context because there's going to be good ideas, right? There's going to be good ideas on improvement and, expansion and all sorts of things, and those, we want to capture those good ideas, but it's so important to understand the context, right? It's so important to understand the context with which we're working in. And hopefully that also helps, some of this may help as you get calls about, 2024 budget in terms of, residents and taxpayers, right? To be as a bit of a reminder to be able to speak to some of the other, aspects. So, we've already started along our journey. This is our official primer, and we're going to keep moving along the journey, building that knowledge, as we go through. And certainly, I remember, we had comments from council at the end of last year. Said we get good, comments, at the end after we've already gone in and passed the budget. So, I encourage you to go back, revisit what those, helpful comments are. Feel free to have a conversation with me, share with me, and have that become part of the discussion. If someone calls you about the tax bill they're going to receive at the end of the month, ask them for their ideas, right? Because there's many ways to kind of get that input, and you're an important conduit for us. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Director, for that presentation. And I think I can speak on behalf of Council to say we really appreciate this new approach to the budget, starting early, making sure that we are properly primed, that we have some of the information in front of us so that we can digest. We have time to reflect. We have time to be prepared. And then when it comes time to make the decisions, we will be ready with all the information that we need. And I would also just echo your comments about now is the time to start collecting the ideas and the feedback and the things that we've heard from the public previously. And I'm also looking forward to hearing more about the community engagement plans that will be in front of us to try to have really robust engagement and try to convince our community that participating in budgets is actually important and can be fun. The latter part is more of a challenge. But changing the narrative to have early engagement so that by the time we are making those decisions in the fall, that we will do so with a fulsome process. So really appreciate this new approach to the budget. Any other comments or questions from, yes, Councillor Lass?
Starting early is a good idea. That gives us more time to twist and turn in bed between now and December when we have to make the final decision. But having said that, on slide 33, the development charges, when can we expect to claw back some of our prepaid development charges?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure that I understand the question.
Well,
Clawback or
Well, we have spent the money creating the infrastructure, and we haven't collected the development charges against it. Is that true?
that is correct.
So-
And many municipalities are in that spot. So effectively to get it's as every time someone comes in, right, takes out a building permit, in most cases if it's net new, then they contribute, in one form or another to the development charges, right? So it's about the growth coming in that was included in, it was anticipated, right? The other part is to slow down on the spending of development charges, right? So if we have a project that comes forward in capital, if you focus it solely, if you come from the focus, more on the levy side and say, well, hey, let's do this because it's going to be funded from development charges. Well, that's great, right? It's not necessarily having a significant of a levy impact, but the impact that it does have is that it's pulling from a pool of money that's not necessarily there, right? And so what that ends up doing is actually creating a bit of a negative from a cash flow standpoint, meaning if that's the only thing we had in our bank balance would be negative, right? And so it's now relying, in order for us to do that, we actually have to fund it through other internal, funds to be able to make the, make the check or send the electronic payment these days for, that project, right? Because we can fund it from development charges. However, we don't have those development charges haven't all necessarily come in. They're not in the piggy bank, so to speak, for us to be able to take the money out.
That's what I'm asking. When will they be in the piggy bank?
Well, that depends on how quickly the development, comes in.
Can you forecast that?
Well, you saw, so as we go through the development charges, they will be talking about that at the statutory public meeting, what the anticipated growth is looking like, for the next 10-year time horizon. So that will be part of that. But I mean, I will say, it is an estimate. And it's an estimate based on the provincial, plan that's fairly optimistic, especially for us falling just outside of the GTA. And so, that's one of the things we do need to take into account. But certainly, certainly it comes with the growth. If we added 10,000, people, meaning all the new homes or multi-res or whatever that goes with that, and new industrial and commercial goes with that, we wouldn't have negative development charges given the infrastructure that we've done now. But obviously, if all of a sudden we had that kind of a population influx, there would be more things that we would need to do, right? One hockey rink pad probably wouldn't be enough, and we'd be looking to expand, and with that would be more draws on our development charges. So
just to emphasize the accuracy of trying to forecast it, because we don't want to be double dipping. We don't want to be increasing our levy and then all of a sudden find out, we underestimated the impact of how much development charges were really outstanding to us, and yet we've increased the tax levy, and we've created a position that is perhaps we've taxed more than we needed to. So that's why it's important that we accurately forecast.
Yeah, that's not exactly the way it works, right? So if we're, we can do all of these growth-related projects and not have development charges at all, right? In ignoring grants and some user fees and whatever, right? They're saying if it was just two funding sources, we would fund the addition to, say, the Town Park Rec Center, or the additional splash pad, or pick whatever it is, whatever growth, the widening of the road, right, to accommodate more traffic due to growth. We could fund all of that from levy and not have development charges. The point of development charges is to look and say, hey, we have more people coming in, right? they should share in the additional costs to the community is going to bear to be able to accommodate, right, their arrival, essentially, right? The roads need to be widened, right? That's what the development charges are for. That's the spot behind it, right? So by using development charges, it's actually keeping the levy down, right? We're not taxing more, it's actually keeping the levy down. That makes sense? And then in theory, once that person has come in, right, they've contributed, right? They've contributed towards growth-related costs for the municipality. Then once they come in, their regular taxes are paying for the snow plowing, right? Whether that's, you know, for the community, which includes their new road potentially, right? But as well as, you know, downtown and the rural area, they're contributing to it all because they're now a member of the community. The development charges is just meant to capture those growth-related, you know, costs. New people coming into the community, what are the growth-specific costs? So that those growth-specific costs are not going to be incurred by the existing taxpayer. Does that make sense? So that you're not paying, right, in taxes, you're not paying more, right? Because now, say, the road needs to be widened because now there's a house coming in next to you, right? And it's a very small, not accurate example, but you understand that's the concept behind it.
It
It isn't keeping the levy down.
Yeah, it just that anytime we do something in advance of having money, it's on the backs of the current taxpayer.
It does have an impact. I was just concerned when you said we were overtaxing, because that's,
Well,
the
there is that potential, but we'll handle that when it comes up.
Councillor Todd.
Thank you, and apologies for being late. I did miss the disclosure pecuniary, so I will note I have none before I go on. For the presentation, earlier in the presentation, you talked about interconnectivity, and one of the ones that I wanted to get, just if you could walk us through it, how does the strat plan connect in, and recognizing that we haven't got the strat plan fully baked yet, and budgets typically are the resource allocation to enable strategy. How are we weaving all of that in so that when we look at the strategic plan and we make some strategic initiatives, they're going to be attached to projects and work back plans that need to be costed out? Could you maybe just speak a little bit to that?
certainly. So you'll recall last year we didn't have a finalized rubber stamped strat plan, but we have a draft one, right? And so we will continue until one is finalized. We'll continue, you know, on that same avenue. And we had, you know, millions of dollars, honestly, in our last budget that was focused on that. So we're going to continue essentially on that same way. And obviously, as our managers are going back, you know, the roads budget is probably going to need some tweaks from last year, but it's not going to change, you know, that drastically. And so that work is some of the work that's being done, right? What the specific wording of the strat plan, you know, we're still going to be having some very similar focuses, and we're going to be using that, you know, to continue just like we did last year. And then as it get, you know, when we hit the point of finalization, you know, then we'll do a reassessment. We'll look and see if there's any adjustments that need to go along with that. And that's one of the things, you know, we're you know, we've got lots of time. That makes sense?
Councillor Mick.
Thank you. So through the chair, thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you for receiving the feedback that we have been providing, and I can see that it has been incorporated into this roadmap. So thank you very much for that. So I had a timely discussion just today, but it's one that comes up every year at budget time, and I don't want to add more to this roadmap, but it is something that reoccurs, is that so just to kind of take it back, so when we do have budget items that we don't have enough funds for, it comes to council, and then we get approval to take it from elsewhere, reserve, or wherever. And so the question always comes up of when we don't use those funds that are budgeted. So for example, staff positions, there's a lot of discussion about staffing costs, yet it could take a whole year to hire those positions, although we budgeted for them. So there's other costs that sometimes are higher, sometimes are lower, and I have a lot of requests from the public asking that transparency of when we go over, where does it come from and what funds do we actually come in under. And we do have some projects sometimes where we do come under cost. So if we could have some sort of transparency or visibility as to how a review of last year's budget and where we were over and under and where those funds go or come from. Is that possible?
So when we post the budget detail, right, it has all that information in there, right? It has prior year's actuals on the same lines as are in there for the budget. So we've provided that information is already available on top of our audited financial statements are obviously at a higher level with some other accounting fund involved. But certainly, and really when we look, when we look at capital, right? Capital comes over or under, let's say in this case, we're looking at what happens with the money if it comes in under. So if that money is coming from a grant, right, we are obligated to put that money back in that grant reserve because it can only be used for certain purposes. We can't say, oh, well, we underspent on this road and now we're going to take that money and go buy staff, right? And so, there's a whole process for that. If it is, if it's funding that comes from levy, meaning that we have more flexibility, right? It goes into a special capital reserve and essentially offsets when we have another project that goes over, right? And we should always be doing that, right? We're not in a good spot if we're always coming in under, right? Or if we're always coming in above, right? So, we should be having that balance, and that's what we see kind of, through that reserve. And then on a broader scale, we do the same thing. So you're right, we may have an employee that we don't hire, right? We have a position and, it was planned and something's off. For whatever reason, we don't hire it. But we may also have some other spot where, someone goes off on a leave. And so we need to bring someone in or something else comes up. So, we have that balance. And I totally understand looking at it on this position basis, especially if that position was important to a committee of council or, a community group. But we need to remember that we are a multi in the tens of millions of dollars organization, right? And so we need to act and operate, like that. And part of doing that efficiently is we have in any year, if we have surplus or deficit, that goes into a stabilization reserve, right? So I don't come to you and say oh my gosh, we're over budget by $50,000 last year. What are we going to do? Right? I also don't come to you and say, hey, we were under budget $50,000, because when you look at in the tens of millions of dollars, that's, it's not nothing, but it's insignificant in the overall materiality. I shouldn't be up here as your director of finance having that conversation with you, what should we do? That money goes into a consolidated stabilization reserve. And that way, if the next winter ends up having twice as much snow as this winter, we don't budget for the worst winter snow clearing ever. We budget for what we typically experience. And then we know that if we go over, we don't have to go back to the taxpayer for additional funding or add it, in year or add it to the next year's levy to make up that deficit. We have that stabilization fund. And so as we close out each year, right? Some years are a surplus, some years are a deficit. And that in a bigger context is effectively what happens. I just, take the opportunity. I think it's helpful. Maybe it's a bit of a reminder. But for the person who's finance department, were they over or under, versus budget? I hope you don't, I hope that isn't really the focus. But, if it is, we post all of the detail of every budget. And when you look at that, you can see what the actuals were. So, that information is there and it is available.
So thank you. But I guess what I'm asking is, it's presented in a very accounting format, and the general public is not going to pull out last year's budget and look generally line by line item. And what you had just explained in general conversations is not known to the average person in the public. So when we have an item that comes up, and I'll say the by-election, for example, caused a lot of concern over the cost, yet those costs could be offset somewhere else, such as the councillor's partial salary for not being here for 5 months. So those type of things are not really thought of as it comes up as the year goes on. So I guess what I'm asking for is just a visual to explain in a way that's relatable to the public. as opposed to that accounting document where, you know, I'm not asking for line by line, but just an explanation as what you just said in a visual format.
Sure. So we'll look at what opportunities. I'm mindful, right? We're about to send out a tax bill. You know, our director overseeing communications, who's not in agreement, was in my office today, and we're like, which parts are we including, right? And because we also don't want to incur the costs of, you know, of turning around and doing regular mail, all sorts of things. So we be mindful of what information, you know, that they are getting. I don't disagree that other taxpayers may have, you know, that question or wouldn't benefit from understanding it. I think we'll look to an opportunity to be able to share, you know, some of that. But I think the best, you know, spot when you're getting those specific questions is that, you know, as you know, kind of the representatives and the ambassadors, as you're aware, right? Those are more specific questions. Are more likely the ones that are going to come to you or come to staff, that we can, you know, happy to address those individually, and certainly, you know, to the level that you're comfortable, you know, with your knowledge, you know, to do the same. And if it goes anything beyond that, to refer them to me, because I'd be happy to have that conversation with them.
Just as a follow-up, just while we're talking about budget, the budget, as you have explained, the reporting is available for all the public, and we are audited on a yearly basis, and we do not do a detailed analysis of all financial transactions, as I understand it, but that you are always open to answer questions, any questions from the public about any of the basically the spending or the funding, stabilization funds, or anything else that, should we get questions from the public, we can direct them to you to answer.
For sure.
Any other questions or comments? Yes.
If I may, unfortunately, she wasn't able to be here today, but she's at home watching. So our financial planning manager, Sruthi Lee, who has, you know, got carried us through or led us through the budget since you've been here, is with us next week, and then it's going to be off on maternity leave. So we're very excited for her. So I did want to just take an opportunity to thank her for all of her contributions, putting together by and large tonight's presentation. She has got things well laid out and organized and planned for us. So I do want to wish her all the best, and thank and acknowledge her tonight. You know, to your right is Connor Holmes, who was a familiar face from last year's budget. So one of the other member of our financial planning team, he's going to be stepping up and taking on some additional responsibilities. So together, we're going to be, you know, working through the 2025 budget, and we're working on getting someone to be able to get in and support him in the normal day-to-day stuff that he would be working on. So just wanted to very much recognize the two of them and all of their contributions for the past year's budgets, but certainly already for this year. So thank you very much.
And thank you for that acknowledgement, and we acknowledge it from this side of the council table as well, so thank you. So the recommended action is to receive this for information. Can I get a mover and seconder on that? Moved by Councillor Less, second by Councillor Todd, all in favor, and that is passed unanimously. Moving on to report 4.2, FS 0824 RE 2025 Community Grant Update. Does staff have anything further that they would like to add before we consider this report?
I know I've done a lot of talking, but I can speak to it. So first I'm going to do is take this as an example of decision making related to the 2025 budget. So up until now, we've provided you with information. We've just kicked off, and here we are at our first, you know, decision making juncture. So I will just note that, you know, we've received, we gave you a little bit of a history we've had many different discussions or different considerations over the past 2 years. I will say last year we provided some recommendations, and I know our committee, you know, and ultimately council, you know, made certain decisions in terms of taking back ownership of the decision making, which was fine. We did lose in there though some recommendations to have more of a focus on the strategic plan, and there were other administrative things that, because we just kind of went in this direction that kind of got lost last year. So we have added those back in from an administrative standpoint. We do spend a fair bit of time with with some of the applicants, and so we're looking to make two changes this year. One, to simplify by increasing the threshold for donations, which is a simpler application. Also, just making the community grant application a little simpler on the financial side. But also in doing so is we're going to receive the applications, and then we are going to post the applications. We often find as we follow up with groups and their volunteer groups, and often it becomes an expectation that staff, are then going to, make all the changes and all the fixes and whatever else, and we aren't staffed for that. And so from an efficiency standpoint, we're looking to make it easier, and then we'll also then be able to provide it to you sooner for your review and evaluation. But I just want, so there's no surprises come November of, what did staff follow up, right? And so, making reference to that. And then beyond the basic administration, parts, there's a note in here about maintaining the foundational funding program. That part would be decided along with any donations and community grants in a separate meeting, which was the direction we received last year. So as part of our budget roadmap, we'll have community grants, donations, and foundational funding night to make some decisions on that front. And then really I spoke about increasing the donation threshold from $1,000 to $2,500. And the other part is looking at having streams. So instead of having random amounts of money, trying to just streamline this a little bit more to have people identify whether $5,000 or $10,000, and that's after looking at where people kind of came in. That does cover the bulk. And then hoping then that simplifies as well for council, right? The decision becomes more of a yes and a no, as opposed to, should this one get a little bit more than that one, and going through. So, this is our recommendation, based on ease and going through, our, just kind of going through doing an assessment and looking at that. In addition to that, we had comments about a rubric, and I know Councillor Mick, you had worked on a bit of an evaluation part. We're planning on doing is, providing the one that was previously used by the college to go through, and ultimately it's each council member needs to make their own decisions, but to provide a little bit of a tool for to help facilitate that. So those are suggestions that we've made. I will say, Cassidy, who does the bulk of the work, and thank you for that, Cassidy. Remember a few months ago after we did our last budget, came into my office and said, I just got a call from this, unnamed municipality who's larger than us, calling and asking for more of the detailed information behind ours. They'd reviewed our policy and they thought it was great, and they're looking to emulate something similar themselves. So, I think it's always a bit of a challenge, right? There's lots of community members, there's lots of different aspects, they're all good causes, and there's a limited, provision of funds. And so I think this is always inherently going to be a bit of a challenge, but I do want to stress, and it was nice to hear it from someone else, that we have a good process, and we recommended the changes I just spoke about to further enhance it and make some improvements. And with that, we're happy to take any questions and look to your direction.
Thank you very much for that report and for the opportunity to reflect again on this movement moving forward for the budget. I'll just speak for the record from my own chair and perspective that I really lament the fact that we lost the independent peer review process, and having the opportunity to work with Loyalist College using a rubric that would have reflected our strategic plan priorities. But I know we made a decision to revert back. But it's always a decision that I think regardless of the changes that have been made to the two different kind of budget amounts, that there's still a real risk of bias being part of the decision-making process. Councillor Adam.
Thank you. I just want to say this is a wonderful report, very, very well done. I love it. And the only one thing I wanted to just You spoke about it a little bit earlier with the grants, and we would obviously be doing the same type of thing if let's say it was a $10,000 grant, they're only using 7,000 of it, the 3,000 then gets returned, correct? Because not everybody needs 5 to 10. Sometimes they're at that middle.
Based on the amounts awarded last year, we've provided, some recommendations. Obviously, I think if we were to there's a $5,000 stream, a $6,000 stream, a $7,000 stream, or even 4,000, 6, 8. It's harder to kind of do some of those direct comparisons and be able to make it a bit of a yes or no. So these are, I understand, the point. Certainly, there's always going to be, those who would want their, kind of custom amount. We're just trying to simplify it. We're trying to simplify it really for you from a decision-making standpoint, to be able to have a little, and there's not going to be apples to apples, but at least the funding that they're requesting. Is this $5,000 level of funding and benefit to the community, or is this $10,000 funding and benefit the community? And you certainly could have something in between, and if you so wanted. But I think, I would hope that if someone says, hey, I'd really like 6, they'll apply for 5, and have a stronger argument, and not, say, well, I want 10, and but maybe then they're not going to be as successful. So, ultimately at the end of the day, you're the decision makers at the end of the table. Someone can apply for 10, you can award them 5. You can award them whatever. You're just trying to simplify. So I hear the concern. I want you to know we've taken that into account, and I totally understand it. This is just the logic and the rationale from how we've approached it.
Councillor Todd.
Thank you. I really appreciate the changes that went into this. I think it captured a lot of what we were talking about in the last one. I will echo the mayor's sentiment around a rubric, and I appreciate the fact that council has now taken back the grant process. But I would like to see, and maybe this is something we can do for in the future as we're always evolving this process, but to have an objective rubric or an objective set of standards in front of us, I think would be very helpful.
Councillor Mink.
Thank you. So through the chair, I just have a question regarding the years and how 1, 2, 3 startup and so on. Will you be providing that information at that time of how many years a particular organization has applied? And I think this kind of relates to Adam's question, is if it would be good for us to know if they over asked 1 year, that we have that knowledge the next year, because there's no reason why they can't save it if they've got more than they needed. So just having that visibility into, because right now we don't know how many years, and especially when a council term changes, that new council doesn't know necessarily how long that organization's been going through this stream.
Sure. So just to be clear, each organization, and obviously I don't review all their financials, right? But they sign their onus that if they don't need any funds, that it's returned to the municipality in each year. So the intention is not that an organization would retain the funds, put it into savings, and just use it for next year. So I just wanted to include that as a point of clarification, but I understand the point. Sorry, my mind finally went blank. But we used to have an organizer, right? And we'd identify which organizations and try and have it all reconcile. Part of the challenge is just, you have certain ones that are consistent, and then you have other ones that are in 1 year and then gone for 2 years or whatever else. So I think then we need to ask a question, maybe, for how many years have they received funding from the municipality? Which, could be helpful or challenging. And, obviously some could take 1 year off and have gotten it for 10 years, but that could provide, some assistance, and we can look at what we'd retained before in terms of tracking and eventually have that available as well. So we'll look into both of those. But I agree, right? It's helpful to have. They definitely identify what funding they had the year before, but for some of them, okay.
Councillor Less.
I really like it. I think it sets some good black and white guidelines and takes some of the grayness out of it. Who sits on the finance committee?
It is this group. Yeah.
That's correct.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so the recommended action is listed on the agenda. Can I ask for a mover and seconder on that? Moved by Councillor Clare, sorry, Deputy Mayor Clare to Councillor Clare, seconded by Councillor Adam. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Moving on to item 4.3, Report PD 1424, re-extension of temporary use, part of lots 30 and 31, Concession 1, Wesleyville Village, ZBO 424. Does staff have anything further that they would like to add before we consider this report?
Thank you, Mayor. Through the Mayor to members of Council, we think the report is relatively straightforward. Port Hope planning staff are pleased to recommend in support of Friends of Wesleyville Village the extension of a temporary use bylaw for conservation, restoration, public education, and accessory residential uses on the properties as listed. This temporary use bylaw went into effect in 2018, has already been extended as of 2021, and it will come to, it needs to be extended again in this year. I would say as a devoid of this request, although tied to this request, they've asked for a refund of the $650 application fee, which we are also supportive of. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention the report author, our newest planner, Amir Saladin, is in attendance today. He is here to take any questions you have. I ask you to be gentle, as this is his first meeting in council.
Thank you for that. And Amir, I thought it was a really well articulated and written report. So congratulations and thank you for the effort. And thank you for forgiving the $650 in your recommendation. I think that was a really important part of the report recommendations. Any other comments from the table? Yes, Councillor Mink.
Thank you. So I just, through the chair, I think that this is just a fairly straightforward and routine application request. So obviously I support it, but what the Friends of Wesleyville Village does is not routine. I think that you do excellent work and have made great progress down there. So I just wanted to take this minute, even though that's not what this is about, but I just wanted to thank you for the contributions you make to the community.
You're here. Any other comments, questions? Okay, seeing none. So we have a recommended action listed on the agenda. Can I get a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Less, seconded by Councillor Mink. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Moving on to report 4.4, PRC 0724, Re-Asset Management Plan Progress. Does staff have anything further that they would like to add before we consider this report?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll speak on this report, but would like to acknowledge our Manager of Municipal Assets and GIS, Jeremy Deitch, who continues to bring asset management planning forward from a sustainability standpoint, awareness, and focus. This report outlines the phased-in process related to asset management planning and compliance to Ontario Regulation 588/17, and is a complementary report to the training that Council received earlier this year. So it's essentially a preparatory report outlining the considerations for the non-core asset management plans, which will come forward to committee's consideration in June. So I'll do my best to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much. Very exciting. Any questions or comments from the table? Okay, seeing none, the recommended action is listed on the agenda. Can I get a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Adams, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. And finally, moving on to report 4.5, PS 1024, Northumberland County Sewage System Inspection Agreement Renewal. Does staff have anything further that they would like to add before we consider this report?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In 2014, the local municipalities in the County of Northumberland, including Port Hope, jointly executed a 10-year service agreement with the county. The service agreement was for the county to administer and enforce the Ontario Building Code as it pertains to on-site sewage. on behalf of the local municipalities, and this agreement expires June 30th, 2024. A new service agreement is required for the county to continue providing the on-site sewage system inspections and sewage services on behalf of the municipality of Port Hope. There is no impact on the tax levy and no cost to the municipality for executing this service agreement. I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Any questions, any comments from around the table? Councillor Less.
Those rates will take two. At those rates, we'll take two.
Indeed, a bargain. Okay, if there are no other questions or comments, the recommended action is to receive this report for information. Can I get a move and seconder? Moved by Councillor Less, seconded by Councillor Adam. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Moving on to item number 5, notice of motions. There are currently no notices of motions on the agenda tonight. Moving on to item number 6, updates and new business. So the first one, very important, is that we wish the Deputy Mayor a very happy birthday. Moving on to, I think the Deputy Mayor would like to bring up one other point of new business.
Thank you very much. The new business that I'd like to raise is relates to the county's consultation for the new official plan for the Northumberland County. The release about their public consultation plan came out at the beginning of the month, and it was would have been about a 12-hour, I think, opportunity to bring forward a notice of motion in time for our previous council meeting. I did not do so at the time in hopes that coordinating with staff would allow staff to be able to work with the county to address the concern I raised. Unfortunately, that has not been fruitful to this point, although I understand conversations continue. My concern is that the current plan for consultations includes only a public information session to be held in Cobourg. However, one of the most significant changes being brought forward in the official plan relates to an expansion of the urban boundary in the municipality of Port Hope, which I feel will impact both rural and urban residents and will have significant implications for future growth and development here in our community. And I would like to call on the county to host a public information session here in the municipality of Port Hope in order to facilitate meaningful consultation with Port Hope residents and to enable us to fully understand the implications of the proposed change and provide input on to whether that's in the best interests of our community. And I will have to defer to the chair and the clerk as to the appropriate way to bring forward such a request this evening.
Thank you for that, Deputy Mayor. We should probably also report that we've had a meeting with myself and the Deputy Mayor and the CAO on this issue, and that the Director Davis has put forward a request to the county for this. So really appreciate all the efforts that staff have undertaken to try to ensure that we could have such a meeting. And I had, in fact, volunteered to bring forward a motion tomorrow at the county council meeting to request that such a meeting occur here in Port Hope. And we do have a motion scribed for that purpose. And with the support of this council, I would be very pleased to bring that forward tomorrow and ensure that we put forward that motion, and hopefully I can rally the support at the table to be successful with that. Yes, Councillor Less.
Yeah, I'd just like to spend a few minutes talking about parking. And there's been some activity on social media, some misconceptions. People are seeing our bylaw enforcement officers on the weekend out there. And just to set the record straight, metered parking is only ticketed Monday through Friday. The 5 Mill Street is available for parking on Saturday and Sundays only, and in the evening after 6 o'clock. I think you could be safe to park there. Elias and Cavan Street parking is limited to 12 hours, and that's to keep the flow of parkers moving so that spaces don't get hogged 24 hours at a time. And we are enforcing illegal parking on weekends. And I don't think there's any other elements that I missed there.
Thank you for that. I just, before we continue on with the parking decision, I do want to, just as a point of order, just sort out where we're at in terms of the discussion around bringing forward a motion to the county council table, just to make sure we've got something on record around that support. So I'm turning it over to the clerk to ask for some specific direction on whether or not we need to have a formal motion for that, or what the process is in order for me to. I would be taking it forward, but I would really like to have the support of this council.
We can note in the minutes, Madam Mayor, that this discussion did take place at Committee of the Whole, and you would be able to reference that when you have the discussion tomorrow. With respect to a formal motion, the procedure bylaw is silent with respect to whether a motion like that can be passed under new business. So it is subject to the ruling of the chair. That being said, if there is general agreement among council that this is something that they would be supportive of, that could be noted in the business. That could be noted in the minutes as well.
I appreciate that direction, and so maybe Councillor Adam, would you like to speak to that? Or maybe what we could do is just hear from everybody around, and that could just be part of the recorded discussion. Councillor Adam.
Absolutely. I just wanted to tell you I fully support you bringing forth that tomorrow. Thank you.
Councillor Mink.
Yes, I support that too, and I think maybe just at the end, maybe just a show of hands. It's not a motion, just for record, show of hands as well for visually.
Deputy Mayor, I know your position. Councillor Todd.
I also support it. I think it's a great idea, and we should absolutely be doing this in Port Hope. So thank you for bringing it forward.
Councillor
I
Les.
agree.
Okay, I think that's a pretty unanimous support. I don't really feel like we need to have a show of hands. So, thank you. Going back to the parking issue, just wondering if there was anything that anybody wanted to add to this discussion, either from the council table or actually from staff. No. Okay. Councillor Mink.
I do need to apologize to Les because I was distracted of the conversation you had because my mind was still set in the unfinished business. So I think what you said, I have to apologize because I didn't hear it fully, but I am hearing a lot of feedback regarding the parking and addressing those concerns. So I think you have a valid point, but I don't know what your recommendation.
No recommendation, just getting the facts out there straight. That we're not ticketing on weekends, and there are some restrictions around 5 Mill Street, and there are some restrictions on Elias and Cavan Street in terms of number of hours that you can park there. Pretty straightforward, actually.
Maybe just as a follow-up to this question to our CAO, if you don't mind, just for the public record, has anything changed with the parking situation in Port Hope?
Thank you, Council. No, there has been no changes to parking. The enforcement has continued to be the same. The Walton Street reconstruction has not changed the approach to parking. I think what has potentially happened is we have the addition of a parking enforcement summer student. So there's additional enforcement with the addition of that summer student. So I think there's more capacity to address parking concerns. Originally, there was the talk of the 5 Mill Street parking lot. Councillor Les, you have it exactly right. That parking lot is available Saturdays and Sundays. as long as you're not parking the transit buses. Essentially, if you are parking the transit buses from doing what they need to do at 5 Mill Street, then you may or may not be ticketed. Elias and Cabin Street, there's been no changes there. There is the 12-hour parking restriction, and the parking meters are being enforced as the parking meters have always been enforced. I think what the issue potentially could have been was the timing of the Walton Street reconstruction and the additional capacity in the municipal bylaw enforcement department. But there's been no changes to approach.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Mink.
Thank you. May I just ask one question regarding accessibility? Have the accessibility parking spots been moved? The ones that would have been downtown, where we have new accessible parking spots that are clearly signed, that are very close to the downtown? I'm hearing from residents who have accessibility access issues that can't be out here. They need a front row spot, and that's not known if they go up there that there's a spot available for them, for instance, at the top of Queen Street or somewhere like that.
I do know that there was some conversations in regards to that at our weekly Walton Street meeting a couple of weeks ago in regards to ensuring that accessible parking spaces were identified. If they are not identified as of now, I'll take it back to the team and ensure that that gets sorted out. We need to have them identified in some capacity or another, whether it's signage or painting. I'll take a look at it. You're welcome.
And just to follow up, can you just share with the public the wheelchair service that has been provided to some folks trying to access?
Yeah, so a member of our team, there was a local business that had highlighted that they were struggling getting the seniors to their place of business. So our staff purchased a wheelchair and has been providing service and ensuring that the seniors are getting front door service and wheeled to the location, as well as the business owners are pitching in as well. So day 2 of construction involved the purchase of a wheelchair, and it has been a great benefit to that business downtown. So we're here to help and be creative.
Thank you for that. Councillor Todd.
Yeah, and I think to that effect, it's important to give some credit as well to our downtown businesses. The HBIA has been working really hard with different organizations in order to try and find creative ways in which to help with parking. Some of those they've been putting loony jars out, so if you don't have $1, they'll lend $1. Some of them, if you call ahead to the business, they will help coordinate that. Some have opened up back doors to create through fares from the parking lots onto Walton Street. So if you look at the HBI's website, they've got a lot of information around the parking, and aside from what Councillor Lessa said about the traditional parking, the amount of creativity that's coming forward from our downtown businesses in order to help people, I think, is quite admirable. And if you contact a business, they can certainly help you out that way.
Thank you for sharing that very important information. Okay, any other updates or new business? Seeing none, we'll move on then to question period. So it's now time for question period. Remember, question period is for questions only and is an opportunity for members of the public to ask questions of council. Please keep your questions direct. And if you have any questions specifically for your council members, you can ask them now. So if you can come up and identify your name and your address and press the purple button before speaking. We'll start with councillors. Do councillors have any questions to share? Okay, I don't see any media with us today, so questions from the public, please.
Oh, that button. I found it. Thank you, Shreesman. My name is Sue Stickley. I live at 231 Walton Street in Port Hope. And I do actually have a question, but I'd like to start off with a very big thank you to the council for considering and passing the temporary temporary use bylaw extension. to go to council next meeting. Our director, Leslie Benson, worked together with Amir, and it was a very smooth process, and we really appreciate everything that was done. My question relates to, could we, in the next iteration of the comprehensive zoning bylaw, eliminate this need for a temporary extension of these two uses, conservation and the temporary residence? We would have the agreement of the owner of the property, which is Ontario Power Generation, because the whole village is a provincial heritage property of local significance, and Ontario Power Generation is bound by that designation because it's a Crown Corporation, and they're very cooperative. So, Mike, I'm not sure who I would ask the question to, probably Todd. Thank you.
Through the chair to Ms. Stickley, it wouldn't be contemplated in the comprehensive zoning bylaw work that we would do in the future. What we would first do is contemplated in the official plan, because the property is designated employment lands, and so we would have to redesignate them first, which is not a problem. It's on the list of things to be considered as we start to work towards that work that's coming in the future. Those are the things that we put on those lists, or those items. So it certainly is noted, and it will be on the list of something to consider when we do that work. So thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Thank you. We had our annual general meeting 1 month ago, and we have some new brilliant people on the board, and our new chair is Kathy Dennis. So this question got asked last night at our first board meeting, and I thought I would bring it forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for bringing it forward, and that it's part of the record now for us to consider into the future. So thank you for that. Any other questions?
Push the button. Before I start, you forgot the birthday of the young lady over here. Miss Minks is 2 days from now, so we need to recognize her too. Good evening.
I thought it was bad luck to wish somebody a happy birthday before the birthday, but we will definitely acknowledge it. Okay.
We're doing the bad luck thing. Hi, you all know me, but I'm changing my hat tonight. I'm Barry Adamson from 1020 Port Britain Road, Port Hope, and I'm a member of the board of directors of the Hope Agricultural Heritage Club, or called the HAH Club. The HAH Club is a group of volunteers who work to promote and preserve our rural culture and heritage, which has been identified as a priority for the community. As outlined in my recent letter to each of you, I expressed the concern about the public and participants to be safely access and park at our open house in June 1st and 2nd, and our fundraising dinner. In order not to use a lot of your time, I will not read this letter. But as the period of time is very short till our event tonight, I would like to ask for your commitment to answer my letter before the end of the week in order for us to cancel or modify this event. And any other assistance the municipal staff can supply would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry, for coming here this evening, and thank you for the question. I'm going to just turn it over, at least initially, to our CAO. We are all in receipt. We're all aware. And I'm going to turn it over to the CAO.
Over to you, Candace.
So Director Davidson isn't with us this evening, but I did receive an email from a manager of the department stating that he has, have you received any correspondence back from him?
No.
No, you have not.
For my first letter, yes,
Yes.
where I asked several things,
Mhm.
it was all no.
Right.
And after
Was one
that,
of them this question?
after that, I asked a second question to the counselor.
Okay. It is the position of the manager of the department that the request be denied, as it is not a permitted use in the licensed pit. That is his position that I am providing forward to council. So from a staff perspective, we have legislation and regulations that we have to adhere to. That said, politically, you can choose potentially to make a different decision, just knowing that it is not a permitted use under the Act, under the MNR. So that's the position of the manager as we have this conversation. So anything outside of that or any further questions, I'll do my best to answer.
I'm sorry I didn't push the button to interject. I got the answer to that question. Yes, I did receive that. I then sent a second note and said, could we just use around the public building, which is not part of the pit, it's not designated pit property, and we can't get to it now because of a fence that was built there. And so I asked the council to help me get permission to park in the, I'll call it the municipal lot all around the building there, and not go onto this precious land that does nothing else but sit there. But I've asked for that, and that was the question that I've asked. And I know you can't give me an answer tonight. I just asking that it please be given to me before the end of the week so we can make some decisions. And that's what I'm asking for.
Councillor Les?
Has that land been used for parking in the past? Well, I think it's kind of short-sighted of us not to allow it.
Councillor Mink?
Thank you. So before I even address this, I just want to also wish you a happy birthday tomorrow. So inside information, but my concern is I know this event brings a lot of people out. County Road 10 is a very busy road, and at that location, there's turns and there's hills and there's lack of visibility. And to my understanding, that fence was placed, that we had to have a fence around the pit. It was a requirement, but where it's placed, part of it is not the pit land. So we've created this problem now for the Heritage, Hope Agricultural Heritage Committee, Center, where now you have to park on the road or else not exist, because this is a huge fundraising event for you. And I'm not going to let that happen as much as I can change that. So my request is either, yes, we allow access to that portion where you've had parking previously, and it's up to staff to resolve that, or to make it safe to park on the road. And provide those resources. I know for other events that we have, we provide that planning to that organization or that event to assist. So I think it's only reasonable that we provide the same for this event and this organization.
Any other comments? Yes, our CAO.
Can I just ask a question just for history and context? When you state that historically this parcel of land has always been used for parking, did that also include parking on the pit lands that are not up for discussion for this year?
Yes, it has. We've always used the pit lands for parking for the last 20 years. The one night we've used it. We go out, we use our bush hog and clean it down and make it all pretty, and have used it. And all of a sudden now we can't use it, and everybody's throwing this fit about it being pit land, but it's always been used for the last, I'm going to say, 20 years.
Right. It's my understanding that an MNR inspection sparked the fence, as far as a complaint from another member of our community was put forward to the MNR directly, which sparked an inspection, and that inspector did come out and did require the fence to be installed. to ensure that the license pit was delineated. That said, the fence was put in across the, I guess it would be, I don't know which direction it is, but against the Public Works garage, which
Yes.
obviously doesn't delineate the pit. I guess my question to you is, when you're not asking to access the licensed pit lands, you're asking to access the portion of the lands that have been fenced off that are not part of the licensed pit. But would that provide enough parking for the event that would alleviate the use of County Road 10?
I'm not sure that we can answer that honestly, except to say that it would help. And that I think our approach is, if we got to do that, we'd have to look at how many parking spots we'd have. And then we would have to eliminate people coming. We'd have to say, if instead of 200, we have to put it down to 150 because we can't use the pit area to park on. We'd have to do that. And that's why I've asked for the approval to be done, so that we can make those decisions and tell people they can't come now. So yes, I think that's the best.
Okay,
Barry,
thank
can
you.
Okay. I do have a question. If the land there that could be used for parking isn't enough to support all of the folks that are attending, is there another spot that's close by that could be used for parking? And I know it's not the ideal situation for shuttling people to the event and back, and I know that this is sometimes used in other instances. Would that be a way to ensure that you wouldn't have to reduce the number of participants, for example?
Yes, we looked at that from the very beginning. We've been looking at that, and parking up at the hub would be one of them because there's good parking up there. But then you're driving something up and down the road, bringing people up and down the road, and golf carts or tractor with a wagon. It all brings in all kinds of more risk that we looked at and said, we don't think we want to do that. We think that would be a dangerous thing to do. A bus could be one, but the cost of a bus would probably wipe out anything we would make in the evening, so that's not a feasible idea for us. Any of the other property is next to it is sloped down in. We've looked at that. We couldn't get in there. If we ever had a rain, we'd never get anybody in and out. We have done a lot of work at studying this, but it just doesn't work for us. The back property onto the pit had some gates. It's flat. It's hard. It's there's nothing there to not park. I'm sorry, poison ivy. But there's nothing else, and that's why we've always used it, and it's been wonderful.
Thank you for that answer. Any other comments or questions? I think that what certainly as the chair, I can follow up on your question with staff and have something back to you by the end of the week, one way or another.
I thank you for that, and thanks for letting me come and talk to you after you spent all this money, $10 million. I felt bad coming up here not asking for any money. Thank you.
Well, the budget season is long. Thank you. Any other questions?
Hi. Question that I came with is I'm just wondering, given that the fact that the archives building is not going to be used for what it was used for, I was just wondering, is there protection for that building? Like, is it designated as a heritage building? Is there going to be any kind of plan to keep the roof in good shape so that it doesn't deteriorate? We've had a lot of discussions in town regarding heritage buildings and losing them and everything else. And I'm just wondering, is there any kind of protection for that building? Because it's a beautiful building.
Thank you, Ed, for that question. I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Corporate Services.
Thank you, Mayor Hankivsky. Yes, the Archives building is a designated heritage property, and it's maintained as a municipal asset like any other. So we do have an annual budget for maintenance to the facility that includes the exterior, interior, and the grounds. But just to be clear, It has not been set in stone that the archives building will be used for a different purpose down the road. The archives in the building today are being assessed by our colleagues at the Northumberland County Archives and Museum, but there has not been a final determination as to the use of the building. It could continue to house the local collection for the future.
So for now, it'll still have its own function, if that same function?
No, I was just clarifying that the future use of the building hasn't changed, hasn't been determined. We are working with the county to open up the archives to access and research requests. We have some announcements coming on that shortly.
Okay, if I might make a bit of a comment on the budget, there was a lot of discussion over grants, vetting grants and whatnot, and I see, according to the budget, that revenues are down, building permits are down, all this stuff is down, and there's still a $1 million fire truck that's being purchased, and I'm just wondering if there was the same amount of vetting over $1 million fire truck as there is a $4,000 loan or grant for somebody who wants to put on an event. Like that's a lot of money if for a truck. Is it a want or a need? That's my question on that.
Thank you for that, Ed. I can assure you that we painfully look at every single budget item that we make a decision on, and that we do take a lot of time to look at both the capital investments that are made in the municipality as well as decisions around supporting community initiatives that build social cohesion and spirit and very important to the health and well-being of the community as well. So all the decisions are taken very seriously. There's a lot of deliberation and discussion before any final decision is made.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Jim Sculthorpe, 1685 Willow Beach Road. Ed beat me to the fire truck. I've asked this question before, but $1.3 million for a 3,000 gallon tanker is a lot of money to move 3,000 gallons of water. What else does this truck have? Is it carrying 6 firemen? Does it have a 4-inch pump on it? Why does it cost that much? Because we have 2 contractors in our municipality that have roll-off 3,000 gallon tanks, and they didn't spend $1.3 million on their truck and those roll-off tanks. We could put a roll-off tank in a heated space, and those trucks would be available within 10 minutes to move that truck or that 3,000 gallons anywhere in our community. So I'd love to know if it's tendered. I'd love our community to see what you are doing with a 3,000 gallon tanker. And I think Claire's got an answer.
Yes, I don't know how many firefighters can be accommodated on that vehicle, but I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Mayor for some comments. And then I have another comment to make.
I also don't know how many firefighters can be accommodated on the truck, but I do like using the example of the fire truck to have these kinds of conversations about the budget, because in our very first budget as a new council, we were presented with purchasing a $1.2 million fire truck, and that was in our very first budget. And I was shocked to find out that that same fire truck had been put forward by staff in the 5 previous budgets as needing replacement. And when it was originally put forward, it was $600,000. So I think the actual answer to your question about why it is so expensive is a kind of a non-answer, but it's the big frustration and challenge that we face given our municipal budgets right now, is that the inflation on these capital assets is just astronomical. And a fire truck, unfortunately, is subject to all sorts of other regulations and requirements that those trucks that the companies that you're talking about may not be subject to. I also did want to point out that this council did endorse a request to the Ontario government recently that has been endorsed by many Ontario municipalities relating to those like fire apparatus and the I guess, approved and mandated life term, I guess, of those assets to ensure that we're extending that as much as possible while keeping the community safe, but also meaning that we do not have to incur these huge expenses when, in advance of us actually needing them.
And just to add to that, we'd be very happy to take your question to staff and get a full response to it. But Deputy Mayor took some of what I wanted to say to you. There many decisions that we're having to make now are far more expensive now than they would have been historically or previously, but that is the reality that we're faced with, and our first priority is to ensure, at least on this subject, the safety of the community. But we'll take your question forward and get a fulsome response to the sub-questions within your question. Councillor Todd.
Just to add one other thing, because we did ask the same question, because when we saw the price tag, it's like, wow, like that's a lot of money. When it goes to tender, there's not a lot of companies that make fire trucks. So that's one of the challenges that comes up as well.
Okay, so maybe one of the issues is that you have water tanker as your explanation for 1.3 million. This is not a water tanker. This is a fire truck. There's a lot of difference there. So please, you need to be accurate in what you are telling the community you're spending $1.3 million on, because every farmer in our municipality moves 3,000 gallons of water every day, and they don't spend $1.3 million on moving 3,000 gallons of water around our municipality. So let's get rid of the water tanker and get back to fire trucks. What kind of pumpers does it have? How many men can it move? What does this truck do for us? Please.
Thank you, and we will take that under advisement, and we will definitely answer the question of how many people that truck can move.
It's got to be more than 3,000 gallons of water for that price.
Thank you for that.
My second question is, and it has come up today, I was shown a map of Ward 1, Ward 2, moving from CP Rail over to Brand Road, hooking into the first lot west of Brand Road up to Marsh Road, all the way up to the low-level site. It's the first time I've heard about this happening. Obviously, the county has brought this forward, and I just think it's quite appalling for our municipality to have the county doing that without our citizens knowing about it. And I appreciate that you are pushing really hard to get a meeting here, but that is a major change to our official plan. And I hope that you will be able to get information to all of the members in Ward 2 in particular, because I think it's a huge chunk of land that is being farmed. And it should stay in farmland and not in houses, in my opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for that question and comment more. It's certainly the reason why this is being brought forward to the county tomorrow. And I continue to press at the county level for better community engagement on many, many different decisions. This is but one of them. And it's something I take very seriously in terms of advocating on behalf of this community.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And all the members of all the residents of Ward 2 will as well. Thank you.
Councillor Less.
Jim, it just begs the question of, and that's a very valid point, but here we have just beyond your farm, not too far, a whole area called Wesleyville that could be developed and not impact the farming. And we've got to get back on that horse.
I think there's, not that we're going to have that discussion here, but there's a lot of talk under the table about Wesleyville. I'm looking forward to it being above the table as soon as possible for all of us to understand.
And just to clarify, there have been no discussions under the table regarding Wesleyville, and as soon as there is information or updates on Wesleyville, those will be shared with the public.
I appreciate that, but I think maybe not at this table, but at other tables, I think there is discussion.
That I can't comment on. Other questions or comments from the public? Okay, thank you. This concludes our business to be covered on today's agenda, and I'm in a position to adjourn the meeting of the Committee of the Whole at 8:20 p.m. Thank you to everybody for your attendance and participation this evening.